Ladies and gentlemen, there comes a point in the life of every sensitive soul, the empath, when silence becomes more powerful than explanation, solitude more sacred than approval, and authenticity more vital than acceptance. It is in this moment that the empath reaches the stage of their transformation. A stage not of fragility but of fire. A stage many have feared, misjudged and labeled dangerous. But let us make no mistake, the danger is not to society. The danger is to the illusions that society clings to. Illusions that the stage empath now sees through completely. The empath's journey often begins in the realm of adaptation. From childhood, many empaths unconsciously learn that their safety, emotional, relational, even physical, depends on their ability to tune into the emotional states of others. They become skilled at reading the room, anticipating needs, softening tension, and silencing their own discomfort, so as not to disturb the delicate equilibrium around them. In this early landscape, their empathy becomes a gift and a survival mechanism. But this adaptation comes at a high cost: the slow, quiet abandonment of the self. The empath begins to identify not with their own desires, but with the emotional temperature of others. Their sense of identity becomes porous, ungrounded, shaped by who others need them to be rather than who they truly are. As the years unfold, the end becomes more practiced in this role. They become the healer, the peacekeeper, the confidant, the one who always understands. They may be praised for their sensitivity, even admired, but it is a hollow kind of praise, one that reinforces the mask rather than revealing the soul beneath it. Somewhere deep within, the empath feels the emptiness growing. A quiet ache that cannot be soothed by external validation. They begin to sense that while they've been helping others find their way, they themselves have grown lost. They have become a mirror for others' needs and pain, but they no longer recognize their own reflection. It is here, in this silent desperation, that the seeds of transformation are sown. The final stage of the empath begins when this false self, this carefully constructed persona of helpfulness, gentleness, and self-denial, begins to collapse. It is not a graceful process. It often comes through crisis, a betrayal, a burnout. A breaking point where the empath can no longer pretend that everything is fine. Their nervous system rebels, their soul revolts, and for the first time, they feel the magnitude of their own suppression. The collapse is not just emotional, it is existential. The empath begins to ask the most dangerous questions: who am I really? What do I want apart from what others expect from me? What is my truth stripped of politeness, fear and performance? In this unraveling, the empath meets the parts of themselves they have long abandoned. Anger, long suppressed for fear of disapproval, begins to rise. Desire, once sacrificed for the comfort of others, now demands to be acknowledged. The empath begins to feel urges they were taught to suppress: the urge to say no, the urge to walk away, the urge to take up space unapologetically. These urges do not mean they are losing their sensitivity. They mean they are reclaiming their wholeness. The collapse of the false self is not the end, it is the beginning of embodiment. It is the moment when the empath stops filtering themselves' needs and begins to excavate their own. This transformation is often misunderstood by those around them. People who have long benefited from the empath's compliance may accuse them of being cold, distant, selfish. But in truth, the empath is becoming authentic. They are no longer willing to sacrifice their emotional well-being to keep others comfortable. They begin to speak with a new clarity, act with a new firmness. They are no longer the endlessly giving caretaker, they are becoming someone rooted, defined, self-directed. It is not that they care less. It is that they care differently. They have learned that empathy without boundaries is self-erasure. They are no longer available for relationships that demand their silence as proof of love. This shift, though liberating, can be isolating. The empath may grieve the roles they played, the people they lose, the identity they leave behind. But beneath that grief is a growing sense of liberation. A quiet joy that comes from touching something real within themselves. They begin to realize that they are not here to be everything for everyone. They are here to be fully, fiercely themselves. The empath, in their earlier stages of development, often carries within them an unconscious belief that they are responsible for the healing of others. This is not born from arrogance, but from a deeply ingrained emotional code that tells them love must always be accompanied by sacrifice. When they see suffering, they do not merely witness it. They absorb it, internalize it, and in many cases, try to transmute it through their own energy. This is the foundation of the savior complex. The empath becomes not just a companion to pain but a vessel for it. They attract wounded souls not by accident but by design. Somewhere inside, they believe that if they can only love hard enough, show enough patience, offer enough understanding, then they can fix what is broken in others. And in doing so, they imagine they will finally be safe, finally be loved in return, finally matter. The illusion of healing others becomes a deeply seductive role. The empath becomes addicted to potential. They see the good beneath the chaos, the light behind the trauma, and they feel it is their sacred duty to help bring it forth. This often means tolerating mistreatment, excusing patterns of abuse, and staying far too long in emotionally depleting relationships. Their love becomes a lifeline for those who are unwilling or unable to face themselves. The empath offers and offers, hoping that eventually, their sacrifice will inspire transformation in the other person, but the moment never comes. The wounded individual remains unchanged, or worse, becomes more dependent, more manipulative, more entitled. And still, the empath stays tethered by guilt and the false belief that abandoning the other person means abandoning love itself. Eventually, the empath reaches a point of profound emotional exhaustion. The realization begins to dawn slowly and painfully, that no amount of compassion can heal someone who does not wish to heal. They start to see that their love has been used not as medicine, but as anesthesia, something that numbs the pain temporarily but prevents true healing from taking place. They recognize that, in trying to rescue others, they have neglected themselves. They have confused enabling with empathy and martyrdom with meaning. The savior complex, once their source of pride and identity, now reveals itself to be a cage built from self-abandonment. It becomes clear that what they believed to be unconditional love was, in many cases, a form of emotional self-neglect dressed up at you. This recognition is devastating and liberating at once. The empath begins to understand that love, real love, cannot be forced, coerced, or extracted through suffering. They begin to let go of the need to be needed. They stop offering themselves as a solution to other people's dysfunctions. They start asking new questions. Not, how can I fix them? But why do I feel responsible for them? And what part of me believes I must earn love through pain? These questions mark the beginning of a deeper journey inward. The empath begins to reclaim the energy they once gave away indiscriminately. They start to reserve their care for those who are actively engaged in their own healing. They learn that being supportive does not mean being sacrificial, and that walking away can be an act of greater love than staying. As this shift takes place, the empath's energy changes. They are no longer drawn to chaos disguised as connection. They no longer feel compelled to rescue people from themselves. Instead, they begin to radiate a different kind of strength, a quiet, grounded clarity that says, I am here for truth, not illusion. I will walk with you, but I will not carry you. This clarity can be unsettling to those who once depended on the empath's compliance. The empath may be accused of being cold or unkind, but this is only because their presence is no longer available to reinforce someone else's avoidance. They are no longer playing the role of savior. They are becoming sovereign. They are no longer consumed by the need to be everything for someone who refuses to be something for themselves. For most of their lives, the empath is conditioned to believe that love must be proven through availability, through endless patience, through never saying no. They are praised for being kind, selfless, and always there, and so they learn that their value lies in their openness. Open heart, open schedule, open energy field. They become the person others turn to in crisis. The one who always answers the phone at midnight, who listens without judgment, who forgives without receiving an apology. They are taught that to be loving is to be accessible, and to be accessible is to be boundaryless. But what no one tells them is that this lack of boundary is not compassion, it is erosion. Over time, they begin to feel the consequences of this emotional openness in their bodies, in their nervous systems, in their spirit. They feel drained, scattered, overwhelmed. And yet they still push forward because saying no feels like failure. To protect their energy feels like betrayal. They believe that if they truly care, they must always be available. This pattern continues until something shifts, often through betrayal, burnout, or deep emotional depletion. The empath, once so open, so giving, begins to see that their energy has become a resource others consume without consciousness. They begin to notice how often they are left empty after interactions. How often they override their own needs for the sake of harmony. There is a growing awareness that their compassion has been taken for weakness, their gentleness mistaken for consent. They begin to realize that what they was love was in many cases obligation. What they thought was connection was, at times, emotional dependency. This awakening is painful because it means confronting a hard. They were not just victims of others' needs. They were complicit in the erosion of their own boundaries. From this realization arises the need for something the empath was never taught to value. Protection of the self, not defensiveness, not isolation. Is clear, firm, and sacred. At first, this feels foreign. The empath, so accustomed to saying yes, begins to experiment with no. They decline invitations that feel draining. They stop justifying their choices. They begin to listen to the subtle messages of their own body. The tightening in the gut, the heaviness in the chest, the fatigue after certain interactions. They start choosing peace over people-pleasing. This doesn't mean they stop caring. It means they stop abandoning themselves in the name of care. They start learning that their energy is not infinite. And that the people who truly love them will not be threatened by their limits. The ones who disappear when the empath begins to draw boundaries were never safe in the first place. As these boundaries are tested, the empath becomes stronger. They begin to distinguish between love and control, between support and sacrifice. They no longer accept guilt as a form of manipulation. They no longer feel compelled to explain their no, to soften their truth, to apologize for existing in fullness. They realize that the people who benefit from their lack of boundaries, often the ones who call them selfish when they begin to grow. The empath starts to see that their energy is a sacred currency, not to be spent recklessly. They understand that discernment is not judgment, and that protecting their peace is a spiritual act. Their boundaries become less about keeping others out and more about keeping themselves intact. These boundaries are not walls, they are gates, and the empath now holds the key. This stage of boundary building is not about becoming closed or hard. It is about becoming wise. The empath learns to love without losing themselves. They begin to engage with others from a place of fullness rather than depletion. They no longer seek to be everything to everyone. They let go of the belief that love must cost them their well-being. Their presence becomes more intentional, more powerful. They are no longer available to perform emotional labor that others refuse to do for themselves. They are no longer interested in relationships that demand they shrink in order to be accepted. Their boundaries are no longer negotiable, because they are no longer trying to be chosen by those who cannot meet them where they stand. The empath, in their earliest forms, is often closely associated with what the world deems as light, gentleness, compassion, and softness. They are praised for being loving, tender-hearted, and emotionally available, and so they learn to express only the parts of themselves that are palatable, agreeable, and easy to digest. Anything that might disrupt the image of the sweet, kind soul is tucked away in the shadows. Anger is seen as dangerous, too sharp, too threatening. Assertiveness is mistaken for aggression. Desire is dismissed as selfishness. These natural hid emotions become hidden away, suppressed in the name of being good, being safe, being loved. The empath is taught to fear their own depth, and so they disown the darker aspects of their psyche. They wear the mask of eternal understanding, even when their spirit is screaming to be heard, to be seen in its full complexity. But no soul can thrive when it is split in two. What the empath suppresses begins to ferment in the shadow. The more they deny their rage, the more it festers. The more they suppress their power, the more it turns inward as shame. They begin to experience anxiety, emotional dissonance, even physical symptoms, all pointing to the inner imbalance they've been taught to ignore. They may find themselves lashing out unexpectedly, or falling into patterns of guilt for feeling what they've been told is unacceptable. The shadow does not disappear because it is unwanted, it becomes louder, and eventually the empath is forced to face the truth. The light they've clung to is incomplete without the dark they define. Stage empath reaches a turning point, where they can no longer maintain the illusion of one-sided wholeness. They begin the work of shadow integration, which is not about becoming dark, but about becoming whole. This work is gritty, uncomfortable, and often lonely. It means sitting with the anger they were told was wrong, and learning to understand it as a sacred messenger. It means allowing themselves to want, to need, to take up space, to express preferences without apology. It means recognizing that they betrayed themselves in order to keep the peace. They begin to question who benefits from their silence, and why they were ever asked to choose love over truths. They integrate the shadow. The empath no longer fears their own edges. They begin to embody a deeper strength, one that is no longer dependent on approval. They can say no without guilt. They can stand firm without shrinking. They are no longer easily manipulated by emotional appeals or guilt tactics. They can sense when someone is trying to exploit their compassion, and they respond not with submission, but with clarity. They are not reactive, but they are no longer passive. Their presence becomes a mirror, reflecting back not just comfort but truth. This presence is unsettling to those who expect the empath to remain endlessly soft and agreeable. The empath's anger, once repressed, is now transmuted into healthy boundaries. Their desire, once buried, fuels their purpose. Their voice, once silenced, becomes a tool of transformation. This integration does not make the empath less loving, it makes their love more powerful. It is no longer a love rooted in fear, but in freedom. They do not love because they are afraid of being alone, they love because they have chosen to, from a place of inner stability. They are no longer trying to earn connection through compliance. They are no longer willing to fragment themselves in order to be accepted. They can hold space for others without absorbing their chaos. They can witness pain without becoming it. The light within them no longer exists to comfort others at their own expense. It now shines as a result of their alignment with the full truth of who they are. They are no longer just a vessel of gentleness, they are a force of. And balance is not always pretty, it is not always soft. Sometimes it requires confrontation, endings, uncomfortable truths. But the final stage empath understands that love without boundaries is not love, it is a performance, and they did not come here to perform. They came here to embody wholeness, and wholeness cannot exist without the courage to embrace once had to be hidden. The empath, by nature, is wired to connect deeply with others, to feel into the emotional landscapes that most people overlook or avoid. In the early stages of their journey, connection is their lifeline. It gives them purpose, meaning, a sense of place in the world. Being surrounded by others, being needed, being helpful. All of it feeds an inner longing to feel belonging, to feel worthy. But beneath this longing often lies a deep fear of solitude, of silence, of not being useful. Aloneness can feel like abandonment to the unevolved empath, like a void too vast to sit inside without losing themselves. So they fill their space with people, with problems to fix, with emotional noise that drowns out the quiet whisper of their own unmet needs. They become so accustomed to orienting themselves through others, that the thought of being alone feels like annihilation. But the empath eventually reaches a point in their path, where external connection no longer soothes the way it used to. They start to sense an emptiness even in crowded rooms, a sense of hollowness in relationships that once felt essential. Their sensitivity, once seen as a gift, begins to feel like a burden when constantly entangled in other people's dramas, needs, and projections. They notice how much energy they've given away without reciprocity. How often they've made space for others while abandoning themselves. There is a moment of reckoning where they begin to realize that their presence has become a sanctuary for everyone but themselves. The external world begins to lose its grip, and for the first time they are called inward, not by force but by fatigue. By the quiet knowing that something vital has been missing from their constant reaching outward. This stage of the journey requires a different kind of courage, one that cannot be validated by anyone else. The empath begins to withdraw not from bitterness but from necessity. They stop seeking mirrors in others and turn their attention to the mirror within. The silence they once feared becomes a space of revelation. The solitude they once equated with loneliness begins to offer them clarity, peace, and rest. They start to differentiate between being alone and being abandoned, between solitude and isolation. They begin to feel their own presence in a way they never have before, not as an echo of others, but as something sovereign, something intact. It is here that the empath begins to meet their own soul, not the version shaped by others' needs, but the essence that existed long before they were told who they had to be. In this space of sacred aloneness, the empath's intuition sharpens. Without the noise of external emotional entanglements, they begin to hear the subtle movements of their own inner guidance. They start to write, to walk, to breathe without agenda. They start asking themselves questions they used to ask others. What do I want? What brings me peace? What have I been avoiding by staying busy? By staying needed, by staying connected to what no longer nourishes me? These questions don't always have immediate answers, but the asking itself becomes a form of self-return. The empath begins to cultivate an inner sanctuary, one that is not dependent on being understood, agreed with, or validated. They begin to experience the profound difference between connection and codependency, between presence and performance. As the empath deepens into this stage, they become less reactive, less frantic, less available to every tug of emotional urgency. They stop offering their energy as a currency to buy love. They no longer fear being alone because they have tasted the fullness that solitude offers. They stop trying to rescue others as a way to avoid rescuing themselves. In solitude, they no longer feel the need to be impressive, to be good, to be useful. They are simply themselves, and that is finally enough. Their energy becomes rooted, undisturbed, no longer swayed by every passing emotion. They return to the world not as someone desperate to connect, but as someone already connected to their source. They no longer chase relationships to fill a void because the void has been filled with their own presence. In this sacred aloneness, the empath finds something they never expected: freedom, clarity, and a kind of quiet joy that no one else could have given them, because it was waiting to be remembered within them all along. As the empath moves into the final, and most radical stage of their evolution, something within them shifts so profoundly that their entire way of being in the world is altered. It is not a surface change, not a new habit or mindset, It is a transformation at the level of essence. This is the stage where the empath stops seeking safety and being agreeable and begins to embody truth regardless of the cost. Their energy, once shaped to soothe, to please, to be accepted, becomes centered, sovereign, and unshakably grounded in authenticity. This energy is what the world often calls dangerous, not because it harms others, but because it threatens the fragile illusions that many people still live by. The final stage empath can no longer be manipulated through guilt, coerced through neediness, or controlled through emotional chaos. They have seen too much, felt too much, and burned too many times in the fire of their own self. Abandon return to the roles they once played. This stage of embodiment brings with it a powerful clarity. The empath no longer confuses empathy with obligation. They no longer rush in to save people who have no intention of saving themselves. They recognize emotional patterns, projections, and manipulation with a level of precision that is both intuitive and sharpened through experience. They know the difference between someone who is in pain and someone who is using pain to control. They understand that not all cries for help are genuine, and that not every wound needs their attention. Their perception is deep, but now it is paired with discernment. They are no longer available to everyone, because they understand the value of their energy, and the weight of their presence. They have stopped trying to be understood by those committed to misunderstanding them. They have no desire to convince anyone of their worth, because that worth is no longer up for debate. The people around them begin to notice the shift, and not all respond with acceptance. Those who relied on the empath's compliance, their self-sacrifice, their unspoken agreement to always give more than they receive, may begin to push back. They may accuse the empath of being distant, cold, selfish, changed. And they are right, the empath has changed. But it is not a hardening, it is a return to self-respect, to energetic sovereignty, to emotional clarity. The empath does not meet this resistance with anger or defense. They meet it with silence, with stillness, with the quiet power of someone who no longer seeks permission to exist fully. They do not shrink to accommodate discomfort. They do not explain their boundaries as a way of softening the blow. Their no is a complete sentence. Their absence is not a punishment. It is a choice made in alignment with their peace. At this stage, the empath's presence becomes magnetic and polarizing. They attract those who are ready for truth, for depth, for mutuality. And they repel those who feed on emotional instability, who seek to dominate or drain. Their energy has become a mirror, and not everyone is ready to see what it reflects. But the empath no longer dims their light to protect others from their own shadows. They no longer soften their edges to be more acceptable. They are no longer afraid to be seen in their wholeness, which includes not only love but fire, not only compassion, but power, not only tenderness but boundaries. They do not fear solitude, nor do they need approval. They do not ask for space, they take it, because they understand that their presence is a choice, not a given. This is why stage empath is called dangerous. Not because they are harmful, but because they can no longer be used. Because they can see clearly and act decisively. Because their energy disrupts dysfunction and dismantles dependency. Because they do not explain their transformation in terms that make others comfortable. They have grieved the loss of who they were, and now stand firmly in who they are. They are not here to carry others across their healing. They are here to walk in their own. They are no longer defined by what they give, but by what they are. And what they are is unshakably whole. So yes, this empath is dangerous, but only to illusion, to exploitation, to pretense. To truth they are a friend. To authenticity, a companion. To the soul's evolution, a torchbearer. This is not the empath who cries at every wound. This is the empath who has bled, burned, and been born again, and now they walk not as a servant of others' emotions but as the steward of their own truth. Let us not fear this stage. Let us revere it. For in a world drowning in noise, the final stage empath does not whisper, they radiate thank you.